we'll get started. So thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jinhua, and I'm an organizer with the National Support Team at For Our Kids. So excited to have Jill MacIntyre here to teach us about video content creation. Um, and before we dive into it, I want to share that I'm calling you from the traditional unceded lands of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh in what is colonially known as Vancouver, British Columbia. For our kids, an integral part of our work for climate justice involves recognizing and respecting the inherent rights of Indigenous peoples whose lands we are all on. If you would like to explore some resources about decolonization, we have pulled a few at forourkids.ca/decolonization, and Wyann's popped that into the chat. In case anybody is new to For Our Kids, maybe found out about this training somewhere other than our website, we are a parent-led network of volunteers, folks who are motivated to take climate action for our kids, grandkids, and future generations. For Our Kids teams and members across Canada collectively advocate for local, regional, and national action on the climate emergency, as well as initiating many community-based projects. You can learn more about us at forourkids.ca, and we're always happy to chat. You can reach us at hello@forourkids.ca if you'd like to send an email. Okay, so now to the main event. I would like to introduce Jill MacIntyre. Jill is a climate justice organizer and content creator from Charlottetown, PEI. She is passionate about using social media as a tool to build community and spark action regarding the climate crisis. When she isn't creating content or organizing, Jill is an avid swimmer, cook, and bookworm. So I'll pass it over to you, Jill. Thanks so much for being here with us.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you so much, folks, for joining us today. This is a topic that I love to chat about, nerd out about. So I'm really excited to be running this session today. So to give you an idea of what we're going to talk about, here's a bit of an agenda. So we're going to start with an introduction to video creation. So what is video creation? How does it look on current social media platforms? Why it's such a beneficial form of social media right now? And then we're going to jump into video types, just because there's so many different types of reels out there or short-term videos in general. And kind of we'll go over the biggest types or different categories and kind of the pros and cons of each. Then we'll go over some specific how-tos, kind of get into some nitty-gritty. We'll go over some tips and tricks. We have a pretty lengthy Q&A session. I think we have about half hour for it. So everyone should have a chance to get all their questions out for sure. And then we'll wrap up. So getting right into it. Or I guess actually some housekeeping first. My approach to questions is generally if you can hold it, that would be amazing because we do have a lengthy Q&A session at the end. But if it is a super quick or an urgent question, please feel free to ask it. You can just pop it in the chat and Jinhua is gonna just come off mute and let me know that there's a question. I've tried in this presentation as much as possible to avoid things like jargon or terms that folks might not be familiar with and to explain it where possible. But if I do say something that you're unfamiliar with, or you have like a super quick question about a platform that you don't want to wait, another hour or so to figure out the answer to, please feel free to let me know. And my personal opinion is that there are no bad questions. I know that everyone is coming into this presentation from different areas and different interests and different, some folks might be super familiar with social media and some folks maybe only use it as a side hobby or are barely on social media at all. So I think there's no bad questions, so please ask whatever you wish. And this session is also being recorded, and I also have a handout to share after the session with key information from these slides. So any links that I've shared, any video examples that I'm sharing, you'll all have access to them at the end. So don't worry about, taking notes or anything like that. You'll all be able to get it at the end. Okay, so a quick introduction to video creation. First, I'm actually gonna stop sharing. Actually, I'm gonna tell you about myself first. So, as Jinwa said, my name is Jill MacIntyre. I'm from Prince Edward Island in Mi'kmaq. I've moved off the island to different provinces a few times, but I feel like PEI is always my home, and I'm always excited to come back here. In terms of how I got involved in the climate justice movement, I feel like growing up on PEI in such a beautiful place, I think I also just grew up very aware of environmental issues and of the climate crisis because you can physically see it so much where I'm from. So I would consider myself, for that reason, a lifelong environmentalist. But in university, I would say I really got into the movement, into the student youth and climate movement, and kind of it's been a wild ride ever since. I'm currently a digital organizer and a video content creator as well. And I do some social media management as well. I've done that for small businesses, for environmental NGOs, for NGOs in different sectors as well. So that's kind of a bit about me. I've also started recently doing some of my own content creation on my own platforms, which I'll link at the end, but outside of any organization. So that's been really exciting. And I'm, in general, I would say really passionate about finding ways to use content creation for good, being able to build up progressives in content creation, be able to build up the capacity for NGOs to really engage new audiences and effectively digitally organize and campaign using social media as a tool. So that is a bit about me. And now I would love to hear a bit about you all. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second, just so I can look at the chat. But I would love to just get a general idea of how comfortable here folks are here with social media, with video content creation, just so I know what we're working with a little bit here tonight. I already see some comments in the chat from earlier, so that's perfect. So yeah, looking to improve our social media reach. That's definitely something we're going to talk about tonight. Videos are a massive, massive currency on most social media algorithms, so I think that will definitely help. Not comfortable, only the filming aspect. That is totally fair. The filming can be really, really intimidating, especially if it's your first time. Knowing how to repost on Insta is already a key skill. So that's good that you've got that down, Riley. But I'm seeing folks, beginners, have social media accounts, but not really using them the way they could be for climate work. Yeah, I think that's a pretty common one too. I think I see that a lot in the nonprofit space in general, where I think people realize that social media is like a really important tool and can be used to grow our audiences. But when folks are already, strapped for capacity, strapped for time, strapped for resources, that can be the first thing to go, right? It's not the thing that you're probably going to dedicate a lot of time and effort. So I think it's nice to have some time to think about it intentionally. Okay, also seeing not super familiar with making and editing videos, totally fine. We're gonna go over that. And lots of video experience, but feel like a social media dinosaur. That's very funny. But by the end of this, you're gonna be like a social media baby chick out in the world. So that's great. Thanks for that, folks. I just wanted to check in to see where folks were at on that. Oh, that is my background and not my, there we go. Okay. So thanks for that, folks. So we're going to dive right into it. So my session today definitely pulls on general principles of social media management, but it's really focused on video content in particular. If you're in social media spaces, you'll probably hear people talk about how important video content is, but I wanted to get in a little bit into the why video content is so important right now, especially short form video content, which is defined as things like Reels, TikToks, YouTube Shorts, those kind of sound bitey short form videos. They're typically 3 minutes or under in length, and they're social media gold right now. One of the reasons for that is that they have a really high reach potential because approximately 72% of Canadian adults actually watch user-generated short-form videos. And if you put those numbers into Canadians under 35, that number rises to almost 90%. So that is an absolutely massive, massive chunk of the population. And a massive chunk is on these social media platforms. So those are people that we can deepen the engagement with our base through that, or we can even attract new audiences, which is something that I think in the climate justice movement, we're always wanting to bring more people in, right? Like we don't want to just organize who's already showing up. We need a mass movement. So we need mass eyes on the campaigns that we're running. So I think there's a really high reach potential in that way. Also, for social media currency, the algorithms of most social media platforms are consistently prioritizing short-term video content. One of the main reasons for that is that video content keeps users on the app longer than a static post. So think to your personal scrolling. I love a good late night doom scroll. If I stop to look at a picture or an infographic, I might be on that post for a couple seconds. But if you're watching, a 2-minute video, you're staying in the app longer. So for that reason, the algorithms really boost that kind of content because they want to keep users on their content or on their platform longer, which obviously I have some personal feelings about. I'm sure other folks do too. Just that these social media platforms that we're working with are, of course, not ethically ideal, but there is an element of this of just, wanting to play in the playground that we have, I guess. Another reason why we should prioritize video content is shareability. So, as platforms become more invested in video content, there are more and more ways to share and engage with that content, which can lead to wider audiences. So, if you take Instagram, for example, think even in the last 7 to 10 years, they've introduced new features specifically designed to make people more comfortable with sharing. So things like Instagram stories are a great example of that. Or even in the last couple months, Instagram has introduced the repost feature so that, like, if you're scrolling through Reels and you see something that you want other people in your audience to see, you can repost that, which is just kind of boosts, again, video content in the algorithm. Excuse me. Um, and another reason why they've become so shareable is that Instagram and TikTok are continually trying to find ways to make video platforms more social based. So on Instagram, you'll notice that there's actually now an option to see the reels that your friends like and to exclusively look through reels that your friends have engaged with. So that's really some of the basic ways that Instagram or any other social media platform will boost out your video content. And one other way that I think is a big reason why we should prioritize video content is to be able to reuse existing content. Because once you're comfortable on a video platform, it's then pretty easy from there to turn other copy, so things like blog posts, newsletters, reports, um, even relevant news articles into quote unquote scripts for video content. So I think in the nonprofit space, when of course, or the community group organizing space, of course, when we're usually strapped for resources and staff time, it's always nice when you get kind of like a good bang for your buck out of any work product that people are putting in. So it's really nice to be able to take something like a report, for example, which is deeply important, but might not feel super accessible to the general population. So it's amazing to be able to break that down into a short form video that just makes it more accessible and more engaging to get more eyes on it ultimately. And I would also argue that a main reason why people are responding so well, the average social media user is responding so well to short form video content, is the personal touch it adds. So I think misinformation, or I don't think, we know, right? There's lots of research showing that misinformation and disinformation are at all-time highs on social media. And because of that, I think a lot of users are seeking out trusted sources to be able to really put a face to an organization in order to help establish that connection. Direct-to-camera videos are a really great way to show the faces behind an organization. So if you're a social media presence for whatever organization and you just have, infographic posts, that's amazing, but it doesn't actually show the average user much about who you are, who are the people behind your organization, what does your organization represent. Whereas when you have staff members or volunteers or community members who are producing video content, you're able to connect with them as people. And because of that, video content can convey emotion and it really can humanize our work in a way that isn't always possible with static posts. There's a bit of a limitation there with static posts, just because it can be really hard to convey emotion, and really just connect with someone. So I think the reason, or at least part of the reason why video content performs so well, is that it adds a personal touch to our organizing and to our social media in general. All right, so let's do a quick overview of relevant social media platforms to this conversation. So I have a little arrow here between Instagram and Facebook because they are actually owned by the same parent corporation, which is Meta. So they are very similar in a lot of ways. When you produce a reel on either platform, it will look very similar. They have a lot of similar tools, but there are still some differences in terms of audience and how the platform works. So Instagram, actually 51% of Canadians are active monthly users on Instagram, so about half the population. Instagram is the most popular platform amongst Gen Z and millennials, however, and it's also consistently a really important platform for NGO audiences or environmental nonprofit organizations, because it's really a key audience that folks want to engage, that kind of Gen Z millennial platform wanting to get youth involved in movements. Just the functionality of the app as well makes it very open for environmental organizations to raise awareness, to spread public education, to organize, to bring more people into their community. Unfortunately, however, I'm sure folks maybe are familiar or maybe not. The Meta news ban, you might have heard about that, but essentially the Canadian government passed some legislation, I think about a year and a half ago, that Meta as a corporation then reacted with and basically said, okay, no news on our sites, which is incredibly unfortunate because Canadian news media have mostly all left these platforms in droves. You're not able to share news links on social media on Facebook and Instagram anymore, which is really, really unfortunate, especially again in the context of, AI and rising misinformation and rising disinformation. To not have those trusted news platforms there is really deeply unfortunate. But I think we're going to get into that a little bit more later in this presentation. But I think that also creates an opportunity for some progressive content creation to bring in analysis that includes good news and verifiable news in an age where conspiracy theories spread like wildfire. Okay, so that's a bit on Instagram. So Facebook, the Facebook demographic does generally skew older than other social media platforms. I'm not sure where everyone is joining from. I'm from a relatively small area, and Facebook has amazing reach consistently in rural areas, in small communities, even in larger cities, in specific neighborhoods. It has really good reach. Facebook groups are a really powerful tool to be able to use on Facebook in particular. And I would really, really emphasize that even though we're at a time when I think a lot of social media managers are moving away from Facebook and we're saying, oh, Facebook is dead, Facebook isn't really relevant anymore, I would really urge us to still stay on Facebook. Otherwise, the only people left on Facebook are going to be conspiracy theorists. So I think it's important that because that platform is still so important in so many parts of the country and for so many different demographics, that it's worth investing in. And that actually has 80% of the Canadian population as active monthly users as well. So that actually makes it Canada's most popular social media by a pretty healthy margin. Our next platform I want to talk about is YouTube. YouTube is not really traditional social media, but the reason that I included it is because a couple of years ago they introduced YouTube Shorts, which is very, very similar to a TikTok or a Reel. It's exactly what it sounds like, right? It's a short form video produced on YouTube. So again, YouTube is not a social media, but because you can produce videos on YouTube for that purposes, I wanted to include it. But there isn't actually data available for YouTube Shorts exclusively. The number that I found was that 80% of the Canadian population is or an active monthly user of YouTube, but that doesn't mean Shorts exclusively. So I really think that that number is inflated in our context, and for that reason, it's not really going to be a focus of our presentation. So when I talk about video creation, I'll probably be talking mostly about Reels or TikTok just to simplify things. And then we also got to talk about TikTok. TikTok has 33% of Canadians as active monthly users, and it's consistently had the highest growth rate of any social media platform in Canada in the last 5 years because it is a much newer platform than other options. We're starting to see a lot of environmental NGOs break into this space because it is such a, I would say, a youth-oriented space, and because not a lot of organizations have really look to it as a campaign mechanism necessarily or as a tool to really grow their audiences and build public awarenesses. But there are a lot of NGOs starting to break into that space and recognizing that it is important. So, what I would say is that ultimately, filming, editing a reel is very, very similar across all these platforms. I personally do mine on TikTok because I've been creating videos on that one the longest because I was on TikTok before Instagram even introduced Reels. So for that reason, I favor TikTok, but you can make them on Facebook, you can make them on Instagram, you could even make them on YouTube, and they're all relatively similar. They have this very similar basic functionalities. The differences I would say are pretty minor overall. Just the buttons of where the buttons you push are in different locations. So that can really be a decision for folks on what they're comfortable with. So if you're already on Instagram, for example, and think that that would be a good option because you're already familiar with the platform, I think that makes a ton of sense. So that's just a bit of an overview of your platform options. All right, so now we're going to get into video types. So, even if folks aren't super familiar with the making of things like Reels or TikToks, I'm sure everyone has watched them. I myself really need to reduce my screen time and reduce how many times that I'm just aimlessly scrolling through these platforms. But if you scroll through for any period of time, you'll notice that not all Reels or not all TikToks are made the same. They're all very different. So I wanted to identify some key types to give you a bit of a backgrounder on them and also identify some pro and cons of each of the different video types so that you're able to make an informed decision about what would work best for your context. All right, looks like my example is still loading there we go. Okay, perfect. So viral sound videos. These I would say, are very popular. They're one of the most common types of Reels or TikToks. So basically, it takes a trending sound and you're able to repurpose it a little bit for your purpose and add your own caption. So trending sounds are a really critical way to engage with online users and grow your audience. They're emergent sounds, so things like popular quotes or a little snippet of a song, things like that. And all of the platforms that I mentioned, they actually show you what sounds are currently trending based on how many users are engaging with it. You can use that then to develop original content related to relevant campaigns or calls to action. These are very, very quick. These are typically, because it's just a little soundbite, basically a trending soundbite, they're typically under 15 seconds. So I've pulled in some examples here, just so folks are familiar with what I'm talking about. So this is a reel that I made recently. Maritime Pixie Dream Girl is my personal Instagram. Or not personal, I guess, the one that I use for content creation. And I did a partnership with Ecology Action Center, which, if folks are familiar, is based in Nova Scotia. And Nova Scotia has made a lot of negative news in the last couple of weeks for a lot of really heinous government budget cuts. So this is what I ended up making. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Turn around, full U-turn. So again, it's super, super quick. I think that was probably under 5 seconds. So that was a sound that I was just kind of scrolling through TikTok one night and I noticed, oh, I've actually heard that a lot. Like I've seen a lot of creators make content with that. Like, how could I use that? And then thinking about all of the news that I'd been reading with Nova Scotia, I wanted to make it specific to that. So I added my own caption you can see directly into the video that then people were able to engage with. And this video did perform really well. It generated a lot of comments and engagement. So I think sometimes these things that maybe appear off the cuff or they're just shorter, and I added a much longer educational caption just to give folks some more information, I think they can perform really well. Some of the pros of these viral sound videos are that they are really great for your algorithm. They are consistently, because they're so quick, boosted in the algorithm. Humor is also a really great way to engage with new people. And when paired with a longer, more educational caption, these types of videos can really engage audience with humor while also learning them or driving them to learn and act. That in general is something that I've found to be so key on social media is really being able to use humor and fun to meet people where they're at and bring them in. Because I think in the climate movement, we get such a representation or a stereotype of being all doom and gloom. And if you lead with doom and gloom, I think it's going to isolate a lot of people. So, in my personal experience, I found that leading with humor when it's appropriate can really go a long way. Some of the cons of this, however, though, is that this one kind of involves someone on your team being kind of in the know about what sounds are trending and when. So it really helps if the group that you're organizing with happens to have a little social media addict in your group. Lots of folks do, just kind of got to ask around. Okay, my next example is one that I think is really, really good for a nonprofit context because it is so educational in nature, which is a direct-to-camera video. So trending sounds are, of course, a great way to engage audiences quickly, but I do think there is also a need for more explicitly educational content in video form. Many creators on different platforms have effectively harnessed this direct-to-camera news or concept breakdown video style, especially in the context of the meta news ban. It's almost a bit of a way around the meta news ban because now, say I wanted to share a CBC article about a fish kill in my neighborhood. Um, I live in an urban area actually, so there would not be a fish kill in my neighborhood. But say I wanted to share a CBC article about any environmental issue, I actually can't share that directly on my Instagram now, which makes me really mad. So a way around that is filming a video using that article as a background. And because I've added something to it, because I filmed with it, because I added my own points and talking to it, Meta counts that as original content, so it doesn't get flagged as part of the Meta news ban. So I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about here. This is a longer video, so I'm not going to show it all, but these I would say are very popular for nonprofits to engage with.
We need to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of the federal election last night. So let's start with the good, or dare I even say great. The Conservatives lost, and Pierre Poilievre also lost his seat in Carleton that he's held for 21 years. For the last year in polling, it's looked like a Conservative majority government was almost an inevitability. So let's take a moment to celebrate that as a victory, and let's also recognize that it's coming in the context of a global turn towards far-right governments. Now for the bad. What the actual hell is happening with youth in this country? Do you remember in junior high and high school?
I'll leave it on that happy note. So you can see what I'm talking about here. So I used the green screen tool on Instagram or on TikTok. Both of the platforms have this tool where basically it kind of cuts out all behind you and you can add a screenshot or whatever photo you would like behind you so that it also draws people to those headlines and to that content. So I made this as part of a campaign that I was doing. I previously worked for 350 Canada, and this was part of a campaign that we'd run around the federal election last spring. And we had a lot of great engagement on Reels during this campaign because it was able, again, to kind of add that human face. And I think it also established myself and a couple of coworkers as a bit of a trusted source because we were so consistently sharing different news content that you wouldn't typically see on a social media platform because of the Meta news ban. So I'd say one of the main pros of these style of videos is that they can break down complex political or scientific concepts for an audience accessibly in a way that doesn't feel like work for the people watching them. So I can only speak for myself, but I know that typically, thinking to my own habits, I don't typically watch a nightly news broadcast, right? Like to me, the idea of going and sitting down to watch an hour of news, that feels like work to me. But spending, time scrolling through Twitter and clicking on news articles and reading CBC online and then scrolling through Reels and seeing some of the journalists that I trust and follow or the content creators that I trust and follow doing news breakdowns, that doesn't feel like work to me. So it's more about kind of reaching people where they're at. And we know that increasingly people's attention spans are unfortunately shrinking. And social media has become such a massive currency in our society that I think it's still important to use these platforms to develop content that is accessible and as engaging as possible. I will say the con for these type of videos though is that they do typically involve a lot more prep work because you'll typically, make a script for yourself. You have to source all the articles that you want to include. You have to film, you have to edit. So there's definitely, I would say for this, a lot more work than just a simple trending sound video.
Jill, just jumping in to give you your requested time check. So we're 30
Oh,
minutes in.
perfect. Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank
right
you.
on time, maybe even early. So if you wanted to slow your pace, you're totally good to do that.
Okay. That's awesome. That's good to know. Another one is an event recap video. I personally feel like this would be really, really useful for the For Our Kids context, where I know that so many of your local groups are running different events in your community and wanting to draw more people out to those communities. So I think these ones are a really great and really clear example of how if social media is used right, it can also draw people in. Because I think social media, like when you think about the metrics of it, it's like, I don't want to make a post that just gets a bunch of likes, right? I want to make a post that is actually driving people to do something and engage with their community and engage with the content in a deeper way. And I think these are a really great example of how that can happen. So these videos typically stitch together multiple clips of an event to showcase what an event was about, do a bit of an event wrap up, make the event sound fun, and encourage folks to attend the next one. So I will play this one here.
Come with me to a Power Up art build here in Ottawa. Power Up is a global day of action happening this November 4th aimed at making polluters pay and unlocking renewable energy solutions in our communities. We're hosting a Power Up action here in Ottawa with a bunch of local climate organizers, and we had an art build this past weekend to get all of our art ready for the action. Rented a room at a local community center, brought some snacks and music along with us, got some volunteers out, and then we got to work. We had a bunch of old election signs that we recycled and then painted them all blue, and then painted this grid system on using stencils and then freehanding some as well. We were there for a few hours and we were able to make about 45 of these signs, which was so cool. And now we have a lot of our art and props ready to go for the action on November 4th. It was a really nice way to spend an afternoon, great to meet new community members. And if you want to host or participate in a local Power Up action, click the link in our bio. This cat set to register now.
So that's just an example of a super quick event recap video that I think these are very accessible for right into Reels if it's something that you're not already familiar with. I would say a big pro is that they can be less intimidating also for staff who aren't comfortable being the center of a video. I think it's really natural and normal that a lot of people don't necessarily want to be like the face of an organization or a community group and don't necessarily want to, yeah, film themselves directly before they've done any other style of reel. They can also deeply engage folks who are on the fence about your group, who maybe follow you and are maybe local to you, but they don't really know what your event's about. Maybe they've never been to an art build before and they want to know what that's all about before they commit to coming to one next time. So for folks who are maybe on the fence about your group and kind of like a lurker in the background of your social media, it can really encourage coming out to that in-person connection. I would say cons are that these types of videos can typically get a little bit less engagement than other short form video content types. One of the reasons for that is that the algorithm consistently boosts content where you can really see someone and someone is speaking directly to you. So if it's, like a beautiful landscape that you're sharing as part of your event, Instagram and TikTok unfortunately don't boost that as much. It can also be hard to remember to get video clips at an event if there's 100 other things going on and you're maybe the only organizer. So it can be really helpful to delegate and you can get different people to send you video clips at the end and you can stitch them all together into a reel. So I'd really recommend this as kind of like a beginner-friendly first foray into Reels, something similar to this. Oh, and I should mention too, so that video, I made it while I was working at 350 Canada. We were working towards a day of action, so that was from an art build that we were organizing. But so for that, all I did was, take my phone at different downtimes during the event. I would just take quick little 10-second or less, probably more like 2 seconds actually, videos. And then I went to TikTok. It would be the same on Instagram or Facebook. But you can add a bunch of videos that it will automatically trim together. You can add music and you can also do the voiceover effect. That's something that I did there. So basically it just lets you turn the sound off of all of the videos that you add. And then there's a little button where you can record and your voiceover will go right over it. So again, I would recommend this one as kind of like a beginner-friendly, more accessible type of reel. Then there are also current trends. So these are quite similar to a viral sound video, but these often involve doing kind of a physical activity more so than just being there while there's a sound playing. So I'll give you an example again from my time at 350.
We're climate organizers. Of course, we know that our society is still reliant on oil and gas, but it doesn't have to be that way.
We're climate organizers. Of course, we know what El Nino is and that these record temperatures still aren't normal.
Climate organizers. Of course, we know plants eat carbon dioxide, but not so much that our planet chokes.
We're climate organizers. Of course, we get hundreds of troll comments on all of our videos, and they just end up boosting our engagement. We're climate organizers. Of course, we want you to join the movement.
So this is an example. I think this was from 2024, and it was something where tons and tons of organizations, I would say that was one of the most viral trends for the year of the oh, we're blank. Of course, we're blank, where people are walking and talking and kind of doing funny little bits. That was such a popular trend that year. And because of that, we worked remotely at 350 Canada, but that was during an in-person kind of orientation session. So, of course, I forced my team members into filming it with me. So, I would say the pros for these are that because they're capturing organic trends, they typically perform really, really well in the algorithm. They're very engaging. They're often really fun, again, so it's able to combine a bit of that education with that humor element, which is definitely a key for social media. I would say a con, though, is that depending on the trend, they definitely involve some pre-planning, and they're much, much easier when you have multiple staff or multiple volunteers together in person. It can be quite difficult if you're, the only person in your area with your organization, because a lot of them typically involve having one or more than one people. So that's kind of an overview of some of the different like broad strokes, different types of content that you're able to create on whatever video platform works best for you. Oh, and there's actually one more. So CapCut videos. These videos typically overlay a cutout of a viral video or a soundbite onto a trending sound that you can then caption yourself. So I'll play the example so you know what I mean.
What an incredible coincidence. So do I.
So this again was for the same Don't Get Played by PR campaign that I mentioned that I'd worked on for this previous spring federal election. So that video, that's probably one of the easiest options that I ever did during my time at 350. It was just a picture that I already had on my camera roll. I went to a third-party app called CapCut, which I'll touch on in a second, and it basically automated that entire thing. So it was very easy. All I had to do was add the caption directly onto the video and then post it. So they can be really, I would say, less intimidating for staff who aren't comfortable being the center of a video or who aren't super familiar with filming reels or TikToks in general. CapCuts often trend regularly as well, so you can really take advantage of that organic boost. But I would say that the con is that it does require this third-party app. So it's called CapCut. I believe it's an affiliate business, kind of under the Meta umbrella. I would actually have to double check that. So it does have a lot of integrations with Instagram, so it's pretty easy to use. But it's a bit annoying that you have to, download yet another app. And sometimes there are paywalls. There are definitely free features that I've made use of, but it does sometimes lock some good options behind a paywall, which is definitely frustrating when you find like a funny cap cut that you think would be great, and then you're like, oh no, I actually don't want to pay for this. I would say it also doesn't feel as personal as a direct-to-camera option because you're not actually, talking to somebody, or it doesn't feel like you're talking to somebody. But it does, again, have that viral potential. So this is another one that I would recommend as kind of an accessible first step reel. All right, so now we're going to get into some how-tos. So I would say I kept kind of the how-tos a bit high level just because I wasn't sure what the comfort level was that folks joining would be familiar with. But I do also have some resources that are more, I guess, nitty-gritty step-by-step that I've linked in here as well. So it's a bit of a combination. Okay, so how-tos. My number one recommendation before you even start filming a reel is to have a plan. Often when you're watching a reel, it just seems like the person is, speaking off the cuff. They just had an idea come into their head and they thought they would film it, and it just happened organically. I promise you, in the vast majority of cases, that is not the reality behind the scenes. Often, especially when looking at content creators, like people that do this type of work professionally or semi-professionally, it does involve some thought beforehand. So it really can help to set aside time beforehand to come up with a creative brief, to come up with key points, or even a loose script before filming. It doesn't have to be like a massive, effort-intensive, enterprise. It can just be taking the time to intentionally sit down and say, okay, this is the topic I want to touch on. What are the key points that I want to get across? What are the key messages that I want to get across? And how should I say it in order to resonate the best with our audience? Really just taking that time again to intentionally think about it a little bit will really help you with developing. So again, you won't necessarily need this for all different content types. So if you were just going to make like a simple CapCut video or a trending sound video, there's no reason that you would need a script, right? So this is more so for those more, I would say, effort and time intensive types of reels where the goal is more public awareness or public education. So in terms of whether you need to write a creative brief, key points, or loose script before filming, so say you were going to do like a direct-to-camera news analysis of something happening in your community, that's something that I would, again, recommend putting in some thought beforehand. In terms of which of these options you want to choose, for me personally, I love to have a script. I don't need to follow it word for word. It's no big deal if I switch a few words here or there, but it really, really helps me to script out what I want to say before filming and to have a bit of a flow of order of saying, okay, so first I want to share this news article in the green screen tool behind me, and this is kind of what I want to say so that I can make sure I get my points across. But I have colleagues who really, they sound robotic if they script things, so they'll just use some kind of key points on a sticky note that they can have as a reference. So it really depends on personal preference. Whichever you choose, I would recommend writing conversationally and avoiding overly technical language. I think you really want to talk as if you're talking to a friend. It can be really hard when, phones are pretty impersonal. So when you're just staring at like your own camera, it can feel weird and awkward and embarrassing even to be talking. But it really helps if you can picture just talking to a friend or a family member. Or speaking out loud as you write also helps. Anytime that I finish something like a script, I always just read it out loud once so I can be like, does this actually sound like how a human being talks, or is this just me needing more coffee, right? So it just kind of helps you add a little step there. Okay, and then this is for folks who are interested in doing maybe a more scripted version of a reel. This is a very basic script formula that I would typically follow. I would say the most important part of this is a catchy hook in the first 5 seconds. The first 5 seconds are super critical because that's when a person is going to decide whether they want to scroll through your video or whether they want to stay and watch. So you want to have this catchy hook that really draws people in. So it can be dramatic, it can be emotional, it can be sarcastic, it can be witty, it can be galvanizing. It can be whatever emotion you want to draw on, but you want to make it catchy so that it takes the viewer and really pulls them in. Similar to how a journalist would write a headline or the first sentence of any news article is, usually pretty flashy because you want people to keep reading. Then I'd quickly follow that up with a quick summary of the issue and why it's relevant now. And then I would follow that with why the audience should care in the first place. I think it's easy in the climate movement sometimes to just feel like, of course, everyone cares equally about this, right? But the reality is, not everyone is fully aware of the consequences of the climate crisis, or of different environmental issues. So you really want to drive home why the audience should care. I also typically follow every video that I make with a call to action. So this doesn't have to be anything big, but typically if I made a video a little bit ago about the New Brunswick government that is trying to privatize a couple of public universities in the province. So I made a video about it because I used to live in New Brunswick. I was really upset about it. So I definitely went on a bit of a tangent in my video, but I wanted to end that video with something that people could actually do. So it doesn't just become this cycle of, wow, the person making this video is really angry, and now I'm watching this and I'm really angry, or I'm really sad, or I just got like a massive sense of climate anxiety and I don't know what to do with it. So that having like a call to action can really help with that. So either having like a petition for people to sign, a recommendation to phone your MLA, that kind of thing. So it can be really helpful to, in the bio portion of any of your social media platforms, just put a link in there of some fairly basic action that people watching can take. So that's a bit of a basic script formula. And then we're getting into the good stuff. We're getting into filming. So first you want to set yourself up in an ideal filming environment. Natural lighting, if possible, is always going to be your best friend. It is always going to be the nicest lighting possible. It's always going to give you the best visual result. You also want to do front-facing lighting. And what I mean by that is that you always want to be facing the light. I watched a lot of America's Next Top Model as a kid, so I feel like whenever I'm filming, I always have Tyra Banks' voice in my head saying, "Find your light." So that's what I want all of you to take away from this is to always find your light. So what I mean by front-facing lighting is that you are facing the light isn't behind you. So right now, for example, I have a lamp that is right there so that the light is going on my face. If I had a lamp behind me, I'd be backlit and it wouldn't produce a quality video. So even if you produce, the best script in the world, people aren't necessarily going to engage with it if, there aren't if there isn't a good setup, I guess. Also, no background noise is a big one. So ideally, if you can go to a quiet room in your house, or if you're filming outside, try not to pick a day where it's like super windy outside. But you also always can trim videos after filming, so you don't want to worry if, you stumble over a word or you take a second to get composed. That's totally fine. You can always trim. So in terms of how you actually start filming, so I have some screenshots on this in the next slide. I used Instagram because I thought it might be the most popular amongst this audience. Consistently, that's what I found in different sessions that I've given to a nonprofit audience. So I did Instagram Reels. So this is basically, if you're familiar with Instagram, you just open the Instagram app. There's a little plus in the top left-hand corner. You click it, an option will come up to either post a story, make a post, or post a reel. If you hit reel, this is exactly the screen will come up. I double checked this yesterday because Instagram is constantly doing updates. So I wanted to make sure that everything was still in the same place as where I normally think it is. So this is what it will take you. So it'll show you directly. And then this white button here will be the button that you'll actually press to start filming. And if you scroll through these other little circles at the bottom, those are different filters that you can use while filming. Some of them are like goofy animations. Some of them will do like an actual like filter over your face. I would say a lot of those are not super necessary, but the one that I do recommend is the green screen tool. Every one of the platforms that I've mentioned, so YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram, they all have a green screen option. That is how people use, or if you've ever seen a reel where people put like a picture behind them or a meme behind them or a news article behind them, that's how they're doing it. So this will just automatically come up along the bottom here. You might have to scroll through a few times depending on which other filters you've used, but I promise it's there. It's just like a big green orb basically. So that's kind of how you get started. So you'll film this. You can basically just hit the white button and start talking. And like I mentioned, you'll be able to trim it after. So if you want to do it all in one take, but you need to take a break between a certain section, or you need to take a breath, or you stumbled over your words and then repeated yourself, you can always trim that after. So after you've finished filming, you're feeling comfortable with where you're at, you of course want to edit your content. You don't want to just post right away. That's not going to develop as much engagement as if you put some time and effort into editing your content. So this is what I mean by trimming. It's very similar to even on like a smartphone where maybe you take a video and then you want to cut it down in length. It looks very, very similar. And again, this is all from Instagram Reels, but it looks very similar across all of the social media platforms that I've mentioned. So you can see here that there's actually little drag bars, so you'll be able to trim your content. So for example, when I'm filming, I typically hit film and then put my arm down so that I'm in a neutral position. I take a minute to get composed, take a deep breath, and then I start talking. But that doesn't look good for the start of a video, right? So I just trim that right out and start the video that I eventually post when I start talking. And then another option is this looks very similar to even if you just post an Instagram story. But this is the option, again, that will come up when you hit that edit button at the bottom there. Right here. You'll have more options that come up that you can scroll through and pick from. I really recommend using captions. Their caption feature is amazing. It is such a time saver. Basically, it transcribes and auto generates captions for what you're saying. Captions are a really important accessibility tool, but there's also a lot of research showing that for even for people who don't necessarily need captions for an accessibility or a disability purpose, they're still more engaging visually in general. So people are more likely to stay on a reel that has captions. I would say the transcription, it's again automatic, such a time saver. I would say just double check it because I'm from the East Coast, so I have a bit of an East Coast accent when I say certain words. So sometimes the words that I'm saying out loud are not what it transcribes, especially with people's names or place names. Like every time, like clockwork, I make a reel that mentions Premier Danielle Smith, it always automatically transcribes as Daniel Smith. So I always make sure to read through the captions that it auto generates just to make sure that there's not an issue there. So then once you've auto-generated captions, you'll also be prompted to add audio. I really recommend adding audio to your reels because it does just make content more engaging. Even if you're doing something like this direct to camera video that I was filming where I was talking, I would still add audio. I would just add like a background instrumental track just so that there's not, awkward dead air. It just feels a bit more dynamic. I definitely, if I was talking in a reel, would not add something super lyrical, and you can also adjust the volume of it as well. So going back to this page here that you'll see, there are, again, lots of other options. You could add a GIF if you want to add like a funny little character. You can, through this button here, add screenshots or different photos. If you scroll through, there's lots of emojis that you can add at specific times during the reel. So these are just elements that really, I would say, add a bit of visual intrigue or visual interest that can keep people engaged while watching your video. So again, I wanted to give kind of a high level overview because I know learning new tech skills in like a broad audience when you're all listening together and you can't like go back and rewind me, right? That can be hard. So I found and vetted this video resource as well that will be linked in my handout. It's for probably more of like a beginner, very basic level, very step by step, where there's a woman guiding you with a screen share the whole time that shows you exactly what buttons to press and when. So I didn't want to get too into the weeds for that reason. So you'll have access to that after this presentation as well. I also really recommend running your final product past a colleague. It's always just helpful to have a second set of eyes. And then after, again, you've run your video by your colleague, you want to write an engaging, informative, and fun caption to keep people on your post. So like I mentioned earlier, sometimes I'll post a quick little funny video, but I don't want to just post a quick little fun video that then people, never think about twice. So typically, if I do a quicker or less educational video, I'll do a more educational caption. Or if I've done more of an educational video, um, the caption then, when you're making the post, is a better or a good place to, if there was any information you couldn't fit into your reel, you can add it there. You could add a funnier caption to just mix it up a little bit, but you just want to keep folks reading your post. I would say some general tips for posting are using specific hashtags. So things like the province you're in, the city or community that you're in, even hashtagging like Canada or Canadian Poly. Like those are some really good hashtags to use that are specific. So they're going to show your video to kind of the audience that you want to see. I would also recommend collab posting with other organizations just because that's able to really boost both of your content out to new audiences. All right. So now we're going to get into some tips and tricks. Sorry, one second. All right, so I wanted to Sorry, I had a very nasty cold last week, and I think it's still lingering a bit. So I just wanted to quickly talk about some helpful tools that you might see when you're looking for online resources, or you might see content creators you follow using them. So I want to emphasize that these are not necessary. These can be helpful for sure, and if it's something that your organization or your group wants to really prioritize video content creation in the future, these can be really helpful tools, but they are not necessary. The first one here is a ring light. These are pretty popular and they're pretty inexpensive. These are a really great tool if you don't have good natural lighting in your house. When I first started making reels quite a few years ago, I was living in an apartment that had genuinely terrible, terrible lighting. Not a south-facing window to be found. It wasn't a basement apartment, but it might as well have been. It felt like a cave. So finding a good window to film in was not really an option for me. So I did purchase a ring light. It was relatively inexpensive. I think it was around $30 or $35. This little hook here is where you put your phone and it will hold your phone so then you can go hands-free, which is nice. And then you can change the light on it to different settings. Depending on if you want to mimic natural light, you can do different colors. So that can be helpful if your house or apartment or office doesn't have ideal lighting. However, again, I want to emphasize none of these are necessary. You do not have to buy these to be a good content creator. Because on the other end here, we can also just find windows. So you can film in an office that you know gets good natural light. You could film in your house or apartment if it gets good natural light. You can also just go outside and film. But I would say light is definitely key. Going back here, a mini mic, you might have noticed in a couple of my videos, I use them. That's because I have a relatively new iPhone, but I still don't find the audio quality is amazing. And if there's any background noise, if there's, one of my neighbors pulling out a trash can, I feel like the iPhone will pick that up. So I did purchase a mini mic because I do this on a semi-professional level. Again, this was pretty inexpensive. I think it was around $30 at Best Buy. You can definitely get way, way, way higher end ones, but I personally don't feel like they're necessary, especially for the average community group. But again, they can be helpful if you live in a place where you have a lot of background noise. I live in an apartment, so sometimes my neighbors are just doing stuff. So it can be helpful for that reason too, just to have good audio quality. This can be really helpful if you don't have a window with a nice ledge like this one that you can just rest your phone on. This is called an Octo Buddy. They have other names as well, but they're inexpensive. They're about $10, and basically they stick to the back of your phone and then they stick to a window from there or to some other surfaces as well. So that can be helpful. And then one other tool that I would recommend is a teleprompter app. So not an actual very expensive teleprompter, like I'm sure this one pictured here is. But if you're a person who maybe struggles with memorization, doesn't feel comfortable memorizing a script, but still has something specific they want to say in a reel, I would recommend the teleprompter app. It's literally just called teleprompter. It's free in the App Store. All the features are free. I've used it for different purposes. If I've had like a really long technical reel that I'm trying to explain something and I want to make sure I get the wording just right, I've used it for that. And the teleprompter app lets you record video right in it. So it'll just automatically scroll, similar to how like a teleprompter for a newscaster would. So that can be a really helpful tool as well. And now into some do's. So these are the things that I really recommend for anyone who's, posting on social media in general, but especially making video social media content. I would say try as much as possible to speak like you're talking to a friend, a family member, a colleague. You want it to sound natural. So we have a tendency if we're, reading off a script, you just sound monotone, you can sound robotic. So it's really helpful to actually talk like you're talking to another human being and varying the cadence of your voice and putting inflections on different words, and if you struggle with this, it does really help to practice out loud once beforehand or twice beforehand. I would also say a pretty general recommendation is that if you're a person who already uses Instagram or already uses TikTok and you want to kind of move into that video creation realm, I would just recommend being intentional and paying attention to videos that you like and what you think you could replicate. Especially in the environmental NGO space, there are lots of groups doing really great stuff on social media. I think about the David Suzuki Foundation. I think their social media game is so top notch. And I've definitely seen videos of theirs and bookmarked it and saved it for later and mentally said, oh, this was a really cool trend. Like maybe I'll do this too for XYZ organization. So definitely because these platforms are so trend-based, it is actively encouraging people to look at what others are doing and replicate it, but of course, putting your own spin on it. So I'd recommend paying attention to what you like, but also what you think you could replicate. And then finally, I would recommend speaking on trending topics, on news items, on big announcements. These will really help your content stay relevant. So if there's breaking news, like for example, with Nova Scotia a couple weeks ago, Tim Houston announced, the premier announced massive, massive budget cuts to, basically everything, basically to many things that Nova Scotians would hold dear. So I was able to post a reel the day after that was announced, and I think that was part of why it got so much traction is because it was new. It was something people were talking about and thinking about, or maybe had questions about. So we were able to engage and kind of take advantage of that momentum. And then some don'ts. Okay, so I would say do not cram too much content in one video. This is a lesson that it took me a while to learn because I feel like I'm a bit of an over-explainer. So when I'm thinking about making a reel, I'm like, oh my God, I want the person on the other end of this to understand every aspect of the issue right away. That's not engaging, however, and it doesn't really make for a good reel. If you try to cram too much content into one video, it's going to feel like school and people might scroll. So we want to avoid that. So I would say on these platforms, you can make short form video content that I believe is up to 10 minutes now. I would say try to keep it 3 and under. And even for that 3 and under, I typically try to make mine a minute and 30 max, just because people's attention spans when they're doom scrolling is so low. That doesn't mean that you should limit the information you're sharing, though, because you can add more information to the caption, you can link people to a website, or you can always make a follow-up video as well. That's definitely a great option. I would also say don't get discouraged if a video doesn't perform well, because even though, we can have all these tips and tricks for how to hack the algorithm, tech platforms are not exactly known for being super open or transparent or easy to understand. So algorithms are tricky. So it can also just take a while to build an audience for video content. So I think it's still ultimately important to keep trying out new methods of engagement. And then finally, I would say don't feel the need to engage with every single trend. Trends work because they're organic and they can sometimes fall flat when coming from an organization or a business. I feel like I can definitely think of a lot of examples of social media posts I've seen from businesses that when an organic trend happens and just normal people are doing it, super funny. But when a business does it, it's a bit cringy and it comes off as trying too hard. So what I would say is that when you see a trend, and you can think of like an easy way that you can incorporate it into a theme about climate justice or a theme of your community organizing, do it, absolutely. But I think if you're thinking of a trend and you're really, really struggling to fit it, you feel like you're really trying to, shove a square peg into a round hole, it doesn't really fit, you're not sure if it's going to work, I would maybe just let that one go and wait for a trend that does naturally feel like a better fit. And then some tips for confidence. I just want to quickly run through. We are going to hit our Q&A session in just a second, I promise. But some general tips for confidence. I would say try to block out time intentionally to try content creation. If you feel rushed, you won't be able to experiment and gain confidence. I think in a lot of nonprofits and community groups I've worked with, it's hard because when folks are busy, when folks are strapped for resources, social media is often the first thing to kind of get axed or to go or to not prioritize. So it can be really helpful if you can be intentional about your time if you have that ability. Because if you say, okay, great, I have 5 minutes between two Zoom meetings, this is when I'm going to fully learn content creation and then make a reel. That's not going to work super well. It's going to feel really frustrating for you. But if you're able to say, okay, I know on Friday I have a lighter day between X time and X time. I'm going to sit down and I'm actually just going to play around in the apps. And just experiment a little bit. That is going to help a lot more. I would also say if you're nervous, you can try filming a segment multiple times so that you have options. This is something I'm really critical of how I talk, which is kind of ironic since I do so much content creation through my jobs and in my personal life as well. But I am really critical of how I talk, and specifically, if there's a recording of me, I get so critical of like, why did I say that word that way? Or my voice sounded weird here, or I took too long of a pause. So typically, if when I film, I will typically actually repeat things a couple of times just so that I have multiple versions. So I'm forced to choose between a couple versions. And then finally, I would also say I just want to chat about trolls for a second because that always comes up in social media conversations. It can be really hard. I get a lot of really nasty troll comments, and it really sucks that people can be so mean sometimes. But it does really help me to remember that, trolls are just sad people hiding behind a keyboard, but they also actively help your engagement. Because if people are getting in fights in your comment section and then other supporters are coming to your defense or just talking about the issue, that's generating engagement, so it's actually boosting your content. Obviously, if they're saying like deeply hateful things, that's a different story, and I would just delete that. But sometimes when people are like, "Oh, blah blah blah," she made a reel about climate change. I love oil and gas, or something like that. Like, it doesn't really faze me because I know in the end they're kind of boosting my content. So that was a helpful mental reframe for me. All right, and with that, we've hit a Q&A. So I'm gonna stop sharing now.